Someone once said to me, I think it was Forrest from NPM, he said that that Node suffers from the absent dad syndrome, where Ryan started this thing and disappeared, and he wants to have nothing to do with Node anymore, and so we're all sort of a little bit chaotic and trying to figure that out. I don't think I'm the ultra dad of Node, but LevelDB I can claim that one. Anyway, LevelDB and Node. So before I forget, because I will forget this, I wanted to thank Richie and the Media Suite guys for putting this on. I think we should give them a round of applause for that. This is a really impressive effort. This is a huge crowd for Christchurch. I didn't imagine it to be this big, and this is really exciting to see. I'm not sure, you may be the first NodeConf in the Southern Hemisphere, if not certainly in our region. We've been talking about doing one in Australia for a long time, but nobody's actually put the work in to do it. So these guys deserve a lot of respect for actually pulling this off, and it's been so great already. So anyway, I'm talking about the future of Node. I'm Rod Vagg, and this is, I'm not disagreeing with Substack at all. He's talking about a different kind of future. I'm talking about the sort of the details about Node as Node programmers working on this Node platform. Where is it heading? And what can we expect from the future? So to do this, I wanted to take a look back at the past 6 years and see what we have learned from Node. So Node started as an experimental platform, and it evolved into something now that has these values attached to it, that where we think of Node as this thing that it has become, and it's not because that's how it was made, that's how it evolved, that's how it emerged from us using it. So when I say the essence of Node, what are some of the things that you think of as what Node is? Does anyone want to volunteer any ideas about what they think Node is? Anything at all? Small modules. Anyone else? What is Node? What do you think of? Sorry?
Non-blocking.
Non-blocking I/O. Evented. Yep.
It's V8.
V8. It's very, very strongly identified with V8. That's right.
The power to publish things.
Yes, and low friction to publish. That's right. So Node has evolved to become these things. Now I've got a list here of things that I think Node is, the essence of what we identify as Node. I think it's JavaScript on the server first, obviously. It's asynchronous programming, like people have mentioned. It's module-driven development, which is an important thing that has evolved. We have a very strong small core and vibrant ecosystem value associated with Node. And new models in open source. I think these are the things that are strongly identified with what Node is. And by looking at them, we can see where Node is heading, because they're the things that we are focusing on. So I want to try and delve into each of these and use them as a way to look at where we're heading with Node. So first of all, JavaScript on the server. We don't need to explain what that means, like it's, JavaScript on the server. But what does it give us? It's kind of important, and it sounds kind of funny, but it gives us developer joy. And you wouldn't be in the room today if you didn't enjoy JavaScript, unless you're using CoffeeScript, in which case you better watch out. Developer joy, this is something people identify with JavaScript. It is fun. And I think it's hard to quantify why that's fun, but we all enjoy it. It's productive. And if you've come from a language like Java, like I did, the productivity increase is just huge. Being able to get things done in fewer lines of code, and it comes from a bunch of reasons. It's approachable. There's a good reason why Stack Overflow is full of little snippets of code, because people can copy and paste them into their browser and put them in their web page and just get something fancy happening. You can approach this thing and start working on it really quickly. And it's got a massive pool of developers as well. There's a lot of people out there that can program JavaScript, and then a lot of people that don't even consider themselves programmers that can do JavaScript. They might think of themselves as doing jQuery, but there's a significant number of JavaScript developers out there. This is one way of quantifying that pool. And I think I've got a laser on this thing. There you go. It's from, I think, last month, from Red Monk. What they do regularly is they take a ranking of popularity of languages by projects on GitHub, cross-reference it with the number of tags on Stack Overflow, and you get this sort of rough idea of programming language popularity. It's just one measure. There's other ways of doing this, but you can see in this one, JavaScript's right there with Java, where it belongs. And that's right at the cross-section too. I mean, there's interesting things you can talk about, languages that are up here versus down here. But JavaScript is right out there in terms of this measure of popularity. I think it goes even further because there's a whole subsection of people out there that don't publish to GitHub, that don't comment on Stack Overflow, but are using JavaScript. And you couldn't say the same thing about Java in the same way, because people aren't copying, pasting Java code into their web pages. You're a Java programmer, you're not. So let's look a bit at what that might mean for Node being JavaScript on the server. So JavaScript's not going anywhere. It's not going away as much as some people might like it to. It was only this week, I think, that the Dart team announced that they were giving up on their dream for now of bundling the Dart VM into Chrome, and they were going to refocus their efforts on making it compilable to JavaScript. It's just an admission that JavaScript is around. It's not going away. It's the assembly of the web, as some people call it. And it's here, like it or not, it's here and it's going to evolve. It's going to be, the rough edges are going to be smoothed off, like Tim was saying. It's not going anywhere. Node's adoption of JavaScript on the server truly makes it the language of the web, and it's through Node continuing to push this forward that rings true even more. The language of the web, not just on the browser, but behind the browser as well on the server. And also, another thing that we should expect to see from Node into the future, and we don't see this so much now, but we will do increasingly, is Node helping to drive the future of JavaScript. There's already a couple of people on TC39 that represent Node's interests, and I would expect that to grow over time as we start to use and have opinions about newer JavaScript features, and be willing to stand up and say, we want to represent the interests of Node. And I debated taking this last one out because, Tim sort of covered it, but I suspect there's going to be challenges for learning as language complexity increases. I'm a ES6 cynic. Yeah. Whatever. But my big thing, when I look at C++, I see a language that is so full of features that it's impossible for anyone to know all of the language. So you carve out this part of the language, and you end up programming in like a DSL of C++ that's different to someone else's version of C++. It's such a hugely complicated language that you've got no hope of understanding all of the details of it unless you have an extremely big brain. And I have worries for JavaScript becoming a little bit like that. But we'll see. I'll reserve judgment on that. That's just flagging as a concern. As we see ES6 and ES7 come in, the language complexity is going to increase. The challenges in teaching people JavaScript may increase, although Tim does make the point that a lot of ES6 features actually allow you to defer learning some of the harder bits, like a call and apply, and this, you can actually defer learning that. So maybe I'm wrong there. Asynchronous programming, let's define what that means in the context of Node. So asynchronous programming is an alternative developer mindset. You have to approach programs differently. And if you've been doing Node for a little while, you recognize that pain of coming from a synchronous language background. Unless you come from the browser, in which case you're probably a bit more comfortable with it. But there's this little learning barrier where you have to go through to accept this new paradigm of learning. Node's API focuses on callbacks, events, and streams. Everything that does I/O has one of these things. That's how we interact with Node. That's its model. There are limits to what you can use. You can do synchronously. Like you can't do synchronous network operations. Synchronous methods are generally shunned anyway. If I go searching NPM for an interesting library and I find that it uses synchronous methods, that developer may be on my blacklist from now on because there's huge costs to that. There's a stigma to using synchronous because it's not a synchronous platform. And single-threaded. So asynchronous programming lends itself really well to single-threadedness, and that's what we get with Node. So what do we get from this? Well, it's a high-performance paradigm where you get performance free. Now, Node is a high-performance platform, but it's not the highest, and it's not hard to beat it in terms of raw performance. But what you get with Node is a programming paradigm that encourages you to write in a performant way. And this is one of my favorite examples. If anyone has Java a background, you'll recognize what this does. But it should be fairly obvious. And this is a very serial, synchronous way of thinking about programming. And it's very natural, where you do one thing after the other. And in this application, you've got multiple points of I/O cost, which are completely hidden. So like even writing out to the console here, opening a file, that waits until it's open. Each line, like you read, even though it's buffered, you'll get these occasional pauses to read I/O. And then printing it, then the close operation, then another print. Like these things are huge costs. And while these lines are executing, our program is waiting, and the CPU is waiting, and we're blocked on I/O. You write this thing in Node, and you know what it's going to look like. You're going to have callbacks. You may use promises, whatever you want to use, but you're actually encouraged to write in a performant way where the CPU is never blocked. So you naturally write performant programs. So you can make, like the JVM is actually a pretty good platform. It's pretty performant. But when you have developers that write this kind of code, and most Java developers do, you end up with not very performant applications. So that's what we get from asynchronous programming. We also get scalability, almost free. We can handle huge amounts of I/O in a single process with small memory. It's amazing what you can put through a Node process if you use all the right paradigms. You avoid buffering, use streams. It's just, you can break the file descriptor limits that come default in OS X quite easily. Like that's a common problem, and that points to how efficient we can do I/O in Node. And single-threadedness, actually, I think this is a good thing about Node. Single-threaded, I think, is a benefit because it encourages better scalability patterns. You don't have to, you don't get to use threads as a crutch, and so you end up developing from the beginning with the mindset that this thing has to scale beyond a single process. So you end up, we see common coupling with things like Redis and other external pieces of the puzzle. We shun storing context too much on individual processes. You don't tend to see people requiring sticky sessions for Node web applications. You see that with Java all the time, and there's a good reason for that because they design their programs to scale within a server, and it's easy and it's comfortable. But then as soon as you've got multiply servers, you end up with sticky sessions and all these sort of crazy things. But with Node, we do that from the beginning because it's a natural restriction, And asynchronous programming reflects how the world works. Like it's natural. This is actually how the world works, even though we sort of want our programs to be a bit more synchronous. You don't wait for a reply from an email that you send to somebody before you send another email to someone else. You do these things. Like that's the I/O. You're not going to block yourself waiting for someone else to come back to you because you have no control over that. So doing it in programming is kind of natural. And in the future of Node, I think where this area leads us is into some interesting places. There's an ongoing battle, and I think it'll become more acute over time about programming paradigms. And the important point down the bottom here is that the human instinct is for everything to be serial. And all of these patterns, promises, using generator functions for asynchronous, and stuff in ES7, ES8 maybe, with async await functions, they're all trying to squash things back into a serial flow of programs so we can read line by line. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but you can see a really strong instinct to get rid of this asynchronous flow so that when we read our programs, they go line 1, line 2, line 3, not jumping all around. So I'm not going to predict where this will go. Perhaps one day we're going to embrace async await and it'll just be awesome. But this is something to watch in the future of Node. Module-driven development. This is something that grew out of Node. It wasn't intended originally. Substack's probably one of maybe the inventor of this paradigm for us in Node, and we've just embraced it, and it has become part of the platform, part of our culture. When you onboard into the Node culture, you have to throw away the ideas of building these large things and think about how to squash them down into smaller pieces that you can throw out there on NPM. This is a big deal. So let's define it in the context of Node. NPM gives us this really cheaply. Like Aria said, it's, publishability is really cheap. And the module system in Node solves a whole lot of dependency hell problems. Not everything, but it's a really good step of evolution in that dependency hell problem. As we saw in the first talk today, Bundler did a pretty good job. NPM does an even better job. NPM actually does a really good job. And if you take out things like peer dependencies and shrink wrap maybe, then you end up with a really good solution to avoid a lot of dependency hell problems. But it comes with other things. And simplicity. We don't have asynchronous module loading. The require statement is easy to understand. You can look at it, know what it does. The only thing complex about it is the caching mechanism. But we tend to not have to think about that anyway. It's simple. So module-driven development actually gets us really closer to the holy grail of decoupled and reusable coding. Every platform aims for this thing. And I think we get closer than any other incarnation that I know of to this holy grail. And how do we get there? Well, this is how we get there. This is what we get from modular-driven development. We get small chunks of code which focus concerns on a single thing. Like the truism, the advice for programming is make a function do one thing only. Well, in Node, it's like make a module do one thing only. That's, we push it to the extreme there. So these small modules are individually testable, and they tend to be a lot more tested than you would do if you were building a monolith. They're understandable. You can read a module and know what it does. Like you look in GitHub and you say, like the other day we were looking for, I was doing some consulting work at a client, and we were looking for a module to help solve a specific problem. We scanned NPM to look for this thing. We found about 5 different versions. And to judge the quality, we just opened up the files and looked at it. And we could see, is it good, is it bad? Like, you can do that. They're documentable. So you document these things. It's like putting code documentation is one thing, but actually having a README in a repository is a big deal. Shareable. We put these things to NPM and we can all use them. We don't just have to tuck them away in our little utility folder. And ease of collaboration as well, of course. Put them on GitHub, put them on NPM. People can use them, collaborate, share, etc. This here, who's going to be the first person to tell me what this module is? It's right in the top. Sorry, Substack? What is it? It's right there. It's called Archie. Or Archie? How would you say that, Substack? Archie. Okay, good. This is, if you've got Node on your computer, you've probably got this on your computer. This is one of the most popular modules on NPM simply because it's used by NPM. I think it was originally extracted from NPM as an idea, and then NPM pulled it, like ripped out its own thing and put this back in. So when you do an NPM install and it tells you, it gives you a little tree about what's been installed, it's printed with this, right? This is in NPM, it's on GitHub, it's a single file module, I can fit it on a slide. You can understand this if you look at it for long enough. If you go to the repo, there's 3 test files, and each of them are longer than this file. There's an examples folder with some example code in it. There's an individual license for it, there's documentation for it. There's pull requests for this, and there's people using it in all sorts of different ways. This is kind of unique to Node. You don't really see this kind of pattern in other platforms. So that's where you'll find it, Node Archie on Substack repo. So I just want to take this idea a bit further because at NodeSource, we do a lot of work with large companies, and we see this as an important factor for Node adoption. So a few years ago, like around the 2000s, the rise of the web and the rise of the big web application, it was the golden era of the software monolith. You'd go to a large company and they would have one massive code base that would be the application that ran their company. Then from 2010 onwards, we started to see there's a risk, and we started to see a move towards service-oriented architectures. And then more recently, it's sort of accelerated and become known as the great unbundling, where we got to rip these big monoliths apart and turn them into smaller services so we're more agile. And Node is right well placed in this. And we see monoliths companies accepting that they represent a huge risk to the businesses. If you can't change and adapt, if your thing is brittle and getting a change in there takes 6 months, that's a huge business risk. Your company could die from that. We're seeing a move towards this notion of throwaway ability. Optimize your business processes and your development processes so that you don't invest so much in your code, that your code doesn't mean so much that you can never get rid of it. Just make it work, and accept that it might be replaced soon. So it gives business and code agility, and web scale, of course. And what I'm suggesting here is that Node is perfectly placed for this, and we're seeing it used in a lot of different companies for this purpose. So the future of Node in this area. NPM, I think, now and will be more and more concerned about module-driven development. The irony here is that NPM, the client, and even the server, was a late adopter of this idea. The NPM client is kind of a monolith, and it's being pulled apart into bits, and that work's continuing to go on, but it was very much a late adopter. Everything was sort of in the big code base. But we're seeing this accepted as a normal pattern for Node, and we're going to see more work on this. We're going to see scope modules come help with private development. We're going to see NPM, the way it does installing, optimized so that you can have bigger dependency trees. So that's an area to watch. Service-focused infrastructure libraries. I think there's a trend towards services and microservices. We're going to see more work go on in this area of having these libraries where you can just grab them and start doing service-oriented architecture really easily. Continued evolution of versioning conventions, kind of a tricky one. Like we've accepted Semver as the way to go ahead, but Semver is not perfect itself, and we're not perfect either. So applying Semver is really tricky, and we see a lot of breakage come from that. In the first talk today, Justin talked about that kind of breakage that happens. I think we're going to see an evolution around that, and more of a conversation about the transitive dependency problems, where you've got this drift going on down below in your dependency tree. What does that mean? How can I protect myself against that? So this is an area I think is going to be hotly debated, discussed in the next few years. We have to figure out solutions to this. And module-driven development in the browser. We see this with Browserify, Webpack, but basically Node encouraging the splitting into smaller modules, that going back into the browser. Where they can benefit from the same thing because we have the tools and the patterns to offer that. And ES6 modules, I don't really know how that's going to fit in. Maybe we'll embrace that new pattern. Maybe it doesn't matter. We'll see. Small core vibrant ecosystem. This is a core value of Node. So we see Node's core containing mostly just the essentials. There's always constant debate about what goes in there. You try and put a pull request into Node or io.js that adds new features, you're going to have to be in for a big, long discussion, an argument, possibly your issue closed fairly quickly. Because people want to protect this idea now of small core. It may not have been intentional from the beginning, but we all accept that this is actually a really good thing. NPM and the way Node does dependencies and module loading actually enables a really vibrant ecosystem. And experimentation in the Node ecosystem is pushed right out. So we don't do experimentation in the core. We accept that core should be something that's stable and fairly small, and the experimentation happens elsewhere, and we get rich experimentation. This guy, Kenneth Reitz, I think he's from the Python community. This comes from Python. Like there's a lot of cruft in the Python standard library. The standard library is where modules go to die. Put something in the standard library, people are going to use it, it's going to get stale, it's going to be impossible to change, it's just going to be the most horrible thing. And Java is probably one of the worst offenders here. The standard library is massive, and there's absolutely no inclination to shrink it. It's just going to jam all this stuff in there, and that gives all sorts of problems. So what does that give us? We're not stuck with as many bad parts. Forever. Like you stick something in the standard library, you can't get rid of it. Domains is one of the bad parts. I think we've come to accept now that we could do without it, but we're stuck with it. Streams 2, it's kind of controversial that I put that in there, but Streams 2 is actually a significant portion of code in core. The complexity is kind of overwhelming for most people. Even those of us who work with Streams all the time don't really understand it. Arguably better functionality-wise than Streams 1, but in terms of complexity, probably doesn't belong in core. It's there now. Streams 3 is an attempt to make it a bit better and reconcile it better with Streams 1. but we're stuck with that mess now. This is what happens with a standard library. You put cruft in there and it gets complex. And insert your pet hate node core feature there. Like, I'm sure you can all think of something in there that you know, it's kind of ridiculous that it's there, and yeah, there's something better in NPM. So experimentation, this is what it gives us. This experimentation in userland, we have build tools. I always find that when we go into companies looking at their Node adoption, we see it generally comes in through the front end, because the front end engineers are using build tools with Node, and they start to say, well, hang on, I could use Node for server-side concerns. But this is because like there's this whole ecosystem of experimentation there. We've got Grunt, Gulp, we've got Yeoman, a whole lot of other things that are in there that you may or may not like. Whatever, it can happen, and it doesn't have to concern you, but it's happening, and there's these little communities there. Browser tools like Browserify and Webpack, the communities. The Level ecosystem, so LevelDB and Friends and all of the things built on top of that. Dominic shared some of the things he's been building there. That's a little ecosystem of its own. StackGL, so there's a whole WebGL community that's doing stuff in NPM. Fascinating little ecosystem you should have a look at sometime. There's desktop application tooling, Node.js. Even Atom could probably be considered in here. There's robotics and Internet of Things. I'll put them together. I'll probably get in trouble for that, but whatever. And languages and language features. People making up their own languages and sticking them in NPM so that you can do transpiling. There's just so much going on in NPM that you just can't be over all of these things. I find it fascinating. So the future of Node, I think core will be fiercely guarded. Now that we've latched onto this idea of small core, I think we will see people really guarding that into the future. And I'm not sure concern about core getting bigger is very justified, because you know, those people that are involved in core development have this internalized now, and everything is analyzed. Is this needed? Does it make sense for the future, etc. But that's going to make difficulty adapting to new language features. And the ES6 module thing is one of them. What do we do about that? And other things that'll come in, like in ES7, to take advantage of async await, I think you may have to have promise-based APIs. And if we don't export promise-based APIs, we're going to have people using wrappers from core in order to use ES7 features. That may not be optimal, but you know, to adjust to that, we're going to have to put stuff in core, and that's going to conflict with the idea of a small core. So it'll be interesting to watch. Tension with V8's expansion. This is interesting because the V8 team, the Chrome team, have no problem making big code bases. They've got some of the biggest code bases out there at Google, and they don't have this internal pressure to keep their core small. It's just you chuck stuff in there. And so recently we've had them announce that they're going to experiment with this thing called strong mode. It's like strict mode, but it's their opinions. I think these things come from Dart's failure. They're coming now to looking at JavaScript and saying, well, how can we apply some of the things we wanted to get into Dart into JavaScript? They're very Java-y. SoundScript is a variation of TypeScript that they want to put into V8. The internationalization stuff is interesting. It's in you can use it in Node version 0.12, but not in io.js. The conflict there is that, like, ideally internationalization is something you just npm install. I want to use internationalized numbers. I npm install it, and it comes free from npm. But the problem is, because it's so tightly linked into V8 itself, you can't. It's not really practical to do it that way. You have to actually bundle stuff with core. So there's already tension there. io.js is going through a process of deciding whether that's something we want to pull in, or whether there's other ways to adapt to it. And I think that's only going to continue. And over time, we'll see improved support for userland extension. Projects like Nan exist to support this pushing out of core, make it easier to build C++ add-ons. Let's get them out of core. Don't have to, just because it's got a compiler doesn't mean it has to go into core. And I think we'll see other interesting experiments along the lines of Node pre-JIP, where you can download binaries. That's a pain point, particularly for Windows people, compiling native add-ons. That's something that's going to be worked on. Now, one of my favorite areas, I know I'm going a bit over time, is that okay? Yeah, you can drink later, that's fine. New models in open source, this is a favorite thing for me, and I find this really exciting, and this is where I think we're pushing general boundaries, not just platform boundaries. So Node was born in the GitHub era. It wasn't around when Stack Overflow was the thing. Sorry, not Stack Overflow. What do you call it? SourceForge, and it wasn't born in the era of CVS or Subversion. It's a Git thing. It's a GitHub thing. It's been on GitHub from the beginning. It's adopted the new style open source, and I think it's pushing at the boundaries of this current generation of open source and actually pushing into something new, and I'll explain that in a minute. Many projects are adopting liberal governance models, and I've been having some great conversations with people this weekend already about the kinds of practices we're seeing in the Node ecosystem around this. io.js itself, the request module that a lot of you are probably using, that Michael Rogers wrote, it's now its own organization, and it's got a liberal governance model. HUD doesn't even touch it much anymore, and it's got all these collaborators that feel a sense of ownership about it. The Level ecosystem embraces this, and it comes under the heading generally of open source. So let's take the idea of open source and actually make it truly open. And I think that's just one representation of the attitude that's going on here. Contributors are embraced as owners in this sort of model, where it's not just thanks for your patch, makes my stuff better, awesome. It's thanks for your patch, now you can have a share of ownership in this thing. You can have a say in the future of this thing. And small modules make this easier. It's actually, don't underestimate how important it is that we have this small module culture, because it's less painful as somebody who's invested time in something to give it up to someone who comes along with better ideas or better abilities. I think the Node community, because of this, is more embracing and cohesive. I'm sure that that would get me in a Twitter argument about something to do with diversity. I don't know. But I think that the Node community is really embracing, and I enjoy the Node community for this. I love it. Learning and upskilling is accelerated with responsibility. This is a great point, because when you give somebody responsibility, they have to step up to that level. So something I really enjoy, I have the Learn New Node repository. So that project is used at Node schools all over the place. And I get pull requests on that from people who have been learning Node, and they want to fix some documentation. And I'll say to them, okay, I'll make you an owner as well. And they're like, whoa, I don't even know Node. But they have to step up to that level of responsibility, and it really heightens their sense of, this thing is important, I have to look after it, I've got to be careful what gets in, I have to now have an opinion about things, I have to form an opinion. It's really cool to watch this. I really enjoy this. The future of Node, I think we'll see open governance from the core all the way up. I think this is going to be a pervasive thing. It already is. We've accepted this openness as a new thing. And I think that Node is pioneering new governance models for the next generation of open source. Just like GitHub represented a new generation of open source, there's going to be more. There's going to be a new evolution. And I think Node is at the doorstep of that thing, and is actually pushing those boundaries where open source becomes more open. Just like SourceForge was not very open at all, very hard, lots of friction. GitHub reduced the friction. I think we've got a cultural thing happening where we're going to start treating source code more like a wiki than we are this protected walled garden. And I'm really excited about this. So just a tangent now to look at the elephant in the room. The future of Node.js. Now, I've avoided using that term because it means something very specific now. I think the future of Node.js is actually, you can see it in io.js. It may not be that io.js is the future of Node, but I think it's pointing the way to the future of Node. The problem is that Node as a community is moving faster than Node.js as a core. The core platform is stagnant. And just some examples of what I mean by this. This is just recently by Laurie from NPM, looking at the growth of NPM. This is just mind-blowing. Number of packages here is around the 130,000 packages, and this is a really steady climb, and it's just going to keep on going. And the number of downloads, CJ and the rest of them have to maintain that infrastructure, I fear for them, but that's amazing. The number of downloads of packages, it's just skyrocketing. So the NPM is thriving as an ecosystem, but Node.js is not. So this is a number of core commits. It's not a great measure, the number of core commits, but it's a proxy for what's going on in core. And there's a bunch of other metrics you can pull out related to Git and GitHub and the way people interact with core. But they all point to this general pattern. So this is 2009 here when Node was first developed. That spike there is 0.10, and then this steady decline is the process of 0.11, and 0.12 is sort of down there somewhere. And that point there, which is like yesterday, this is per month. That's actually the lowest it's been since here. And so this is the progress that's happening in Node Core, and this is a big concern. And this is why io.js exists. And I don't want to talk too much about the reasons why this decline is happening, because that gets into some tricky areas. But this is io.js. So if you look at it inherits the same code base, but it adopts a different model. And this peak here in January is bigger than the previous peaks. It's a new record for core commits, contributions to core. And you can actually see a similar sort of graph if you also graph the number of unique authors. io.js has got a very similar trajectory where number of authors now, unique authors, is up, getting towards 100, and Node Core is like, it's still at around 60, where it's been for a long time. So I think the future of Node lies in this region between Node.js and io.js, and we're seeing movements there already between, about reconciliation. The parties involved in the Node advisory board and the foundation, they want reconciliation. io.js people want reconciliation. Exactly how it happens could be painful for one or both sides of it. But I think that the future of Node lies in the mix here. It's not. I don't think we're going to see this, this path where you've got two legitimate futures of Node. Either we have these separation and one of them is the future of Node, or we have some sort of reconciliation, which is the future of Node. So just quickly, io.js, if you don't know what io.js is, it's got an open governance model, much like I was talking about before with open source. It's got a lot of collaborators now who have commit access to the project, but it has a strong culture and process around it, how it deals with that, and it's perfecting and refining that process. Rapid iteration, there's at least one release a week. The commit log can't get too big. If it gets too big, then there's this pressure to get a release out and get those things into the wild. And there's new relationships with the V8 team, which is really exciting. There's actually now a back and forth between io.js and the V8 team. And the V8 team is really excited that there's a server-side platform that's using their code. Before, to them, Node was irrelevant. It became irrelevant because the code that Node uses is literally years old, and it's irrelevant to them now. They work on a 6-week development cycle. And a code base from a year ago or more is irrelevant to them. It doesn't feed back into anything they're doing. So they're excited about that. And io.js is embracing the future. There's tension, like I was saying before, but ES6 is coming. We've got to do something about it. We've got to have to embrace it somehow. So io.js is concerned about the future. The future of io.js, just quickly, some of the things that are on the cards for io.js are better debuggability and insight, better streams. So the readable stream repo, which is the version of streams in NPM, which I would encourage you to use instead of core streams, is now owned by the io.js group, and there's a whole working group around that that's improving that. Possibly there'll be some overlap with the WG streams group for the browser. There's already talks about how to reconcile some of those API differences between the two. That's really cool. ES6 and beyond, we're going to get that because it's tracking stable V8 releases. There's this focus on async APIs in the future versions of ES6, as I said earlier, and as Tim said, there's promises, generators, async await. There's this focus on looking at the async problem, which I don't think is a problem, but whatever. Better number support. There was a discussion on Twitter the other day with Brent and Mike about this, so 64-bit numbers, great. And new server platforms. So io.js now has a relationship with ARM, the company, that they want to push their server-side platform. And Node is really well suited to smaller servers. Like, it's a small runtime, small servers, multiply them out. It's actually really well suited, more so than Java is. So we'll see more platforms for Node to be on. io.js will have an LTS strategy which will solve a lot of people's concerns about io.js stability. It'll be backed by companies like our company, NodeSource, and others in the ecosystem. It'll be like picking a branch on GitHub, and we'll say we'll support that branch, just put patch releases after it. And it'll be a little bit like, probably like the Ubuntu model where it goes on for a period of time. There might be some overlap, but it'll be, you've got this LTS for this period of time. It'll end, and then you move to the next one. So that's coming. So in summary, the future of Node, I think, is Butte. I think the future of Node is really positive. We've got some things to sort out. We've got some friction along the way, but that's part of the journey. I think Node is really exciting, and I think it'll continue to be exciting. So thank you.